After the lawsuit was rejected, he texted, "I'm sorry," for the first time in years. The November wind cut through downtown Philadelphia like a blade as I sat in the cramped waiting room of Morrison and Associates law firm, my weathered hands gripping the plastic chair arms while my lawyer shuffled through papers that represented 3 years of legal battles, medical bills, and sleepless nights. At 62 years old, after 35 years of serving as a Philadelphia Police Department sergeant, I never imagined I'd be fighting my own department over a workers' compensation claim that should have been straightforward, but nothing about the last few years had been simple or fair. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of other clients waiting for their own versions of justice, each carrying folders thick with documentation of workplace injuries, discrimination cases, and employment disputes that had brought them to this sterile office building on Market Street. I checked my phone for the 15th time in 20 minutes, knowing that my son David was probably sitting in his own office across town, waiting for the call that would determine whether our family's financial future would stabilize or continue spiraling into uncertainty. If this story is resonating with you, please take a moment to comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel because we genuinely help families navigate these difficult legal and financial situations. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter to real people facing real challenges. 3 years earlier, during what should have been a routine domestic violence call in North Philadelphia, I had responded to reports of a man threatening his ex-wife and children with a baseball bat outside their apartment building. The situation had escalated quickly when the suspect, high on methamphetamines and clearly unstable, had swung the bat at my partner Officer Martinez before turning toward me with the same violent intent that had already sent 2 civilians to the emergency room earlier that evening. In the split second I had to react, I had tackled the suspect to prevent him from seriously injuring anyone else, but the impact had sent both of us tumbling down a concrete stairwell that led to the building's basement level. The suspect had landed on top of me, his full weight driving my spine into the sharp edge of the bottom step with a sickening crack that I still heard in my nightmares, and the excruciating pain that shot through my lower back told me immediately that something was seriously wrong. The injury had crushed 2 vertebrae in my lumbar spine and herniated 3 discs, requiring emergency surgery and months of physical therapy that never quite restored my mobility to the level needed for active patrol duty. The constant pain made it impossible to wear the heavy equipment belt required for street work, and sitting in a patrol car for 8-hour shifts became an exercise in endurance that left me exhausted and barely functional by the end of each day. After 18 months of modified duty assignments that kept me behind a desk processing paperwork and answering phones, the department's medical review board had determined that I was no longer fit for full police duties and recommended retirement on medical disability. The decision had been devastating not just financially, but emotionally, as it meant leaving behind the career that had defined my identity and purpose for more than 3 decades of dedicated service to the Philadelphia community. The workers' compensation claim should have been automatic, given that my injury had occurred in the line of duty while protecting civilians from a violent criminal, but the department's insurance carrier had challenged every aspect of my case from day one. They questioned the severity of my injuries despite multiple MRI scans and orthopedic evaluations, claimed that my age was a contributing factor to my slow recovery, and even suggested that I might be exaggerating my limitations to secure a larger settlement. The legal process had dragged on for 3 agonizing years, during which my medical disability payments barely covered our mortgage and basic living expenses, forcing my wife Margaret and me to drain our modest savings account and borrow money from family members just to keep our household afloat. The financial stress had taken a tremendous toll on our marriage and our relationship with our adult children, particularly my son David, who had repeatedly offered to help with money we couldn't afford to accept. David had graduated from Penn State with a business degree and worked as a financial advisor for a prestigious investment firm in Center City, Philadelphia, earning more in his first year out of college than I had made during most of my police career. He had always been proud of his father's service to the community and had often spoken about the sacrifices that police families make to keep neighborhoods safe. But the prolonged legal battle had strained our relationship in ways I never anticipated. The tension had started when David had offered to pay our mortgage for 6 months while we waited for the workers' compensation case to be resolved, an offer that I had refused out of pride and stubborn independence that I now recognized had been more harmful than helpful. I had been raised to believe that a man provides for his own family and doesn't accept charity, even from his own children. but that outdated philosophy had created unnecessary hardship for everyone I loved most. As the months passed and our financial situation became more desperate, David had become increasingly frustrated with what he perceived as my refusal to accept reasonable help from family members who cared about our well-being. He had argued that accepting temporary assistance wasn't a sign of weakness or failure, but rather a practical solution that would reduce stress and allow me to focus on my recovery instead of worrying constantly about bills and foreclosure notices. Our disagreements about money had escalated into heated arguments about pride, family responsibility, and the meaning of independence, with harsh words exchanged during family dinners and holiday gatherings that left everyone uncomfortable and emotionally drained. Margaret had found herself caught in the middle, trying to mediate between a husband who refused help and a son who couldn't understand why his father would choose financial hardship over accepting support from people who loved him. The situation had reached a breaking point 6 months earlier when David had discovered that we were 3 months behind on our mortgage payments and facing foreclosure proceedings that would force us to lose the house where we had raised our children and built 30 years of memories. He had confronted me with bank statements and legal notices that Margaret had been hiding to protect my pride, demanding to know why I would risk our family home rather than accept help that he could easily afford to provide. The confrontation had ended with David storming out of our house after telling me that my pride was more important to me than my family's security and well-being, words that had cut deeper than any physical injury I had ever sustained during my police career. He had accused me of being selfish and stubborn, choosing to maintain an image of independence while my wife worried herself sick about losing everything we had worked so hard to build together. In the months that followed, our communication had dwindled to brief, polite exchanges during necessary family events, with an underlying tension that made everyone uncomfortable and created a distance between us that felt impossible to bridge. David had stopped offering financial help, apparently deciding that if I was determined to handle everything myself, he would respect my wishes even if he disagreed with my decisions. Margaret had tried repeatedly to convince me to reach out to David and repair our relationship, explaining that our son's offers of help came from love rather than pity, and that accepting temporary assistance didn't diminish my worth as a father or provider. She had reminded me that David had worked hard to build his career and financial stability partly because he wanted to be able to help his family when needed, and that refusing his help was actually denying him the opportunity to show his love and gratitude for everything we had done for him. But my pride and fear of appearing weak or dependent had prevented me from making the phone calls or having the conversations that could have healed our relationship months earlier. I had convinced myself that winning the workers' compensation case would prove that I had been right to refuse help, that my independent approach had been vindicated, and that our family's financial problems would be solved without requiring assistance from anyone. Now, sitting in that law office waiting room, I was about to learn that my 3-year legal battle had been unsuccessful, that the insurance company's appeals and challenges had prevailed, and that my workers' compensation claim had been denied on technical grounds that my lawyer was still struggling to explain clearly. The decision meant that my medical disability payments would be my only source of income for the foreseeable future, barely enough to cover our basic expenses and nowhere near sufficient to catch up on the debts we had accumulated. Attorney Morrison emerged from his office with the expression of someone delivering bad news, his usually confident demeanor replaced by obvious disappointment and frustration. He explained that the State Workers' Compensation Board had ruled that my injury, while clearly work-related, had occurred during what they classified as an excessive force incident, and that my actions in tackling the suspect had gone beyond reasonable police procedures, making my injury the result of my own poor judgment rather than a legitimate workplace accident. The ruling was devastating not just financially, but professionally, as it implied that I had acted inappropriately during the incident, and that my injury was the consequence of my own mistakes rather than heroic efforts to protect civilians from a dangerous criminal. The decision attacked my reputation and integrity as a police officer, suggesting that my 35 years of dedicated service meant nothing if one split-second decision could be second-guessed and criticized by bureaucrats who had never faced a violent suspect or made life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. Attorney Morrison explained that we could appeal the decision, but that the process would take another 18 months minimum and would require additional legal fees that I couldn't afford to pay without borrowing more money or accepting help that I had been refusing for 3 years. The irony wasn't lost on me that my stubborn independence had created exactly the situation I had been trying to avoid: complete dependence on others for financial survival. I left the law office in a daze, walking the familiar Philadelphia streets that I had patrolled for decades, seeing the city through different eyes now that I was no longer a protector, but rather someone who needed protection himself. The November afternoon was growing cold, matching the chill that had settled in my chest as I processed the reality that my legal fight was over and that I would need to find new ways to provide for my family's future. The drive home to our house in the Mayfair section of Northeast Philadelphia gave me time to think about the conversation I would need to have with Margaret and the phone call I would need to make to David, admitting that he had been right about accepting help and that my pride had cost our family 3 years of unnecessary hardship and stress. The words, "I'm sorry," felt foreign in my mouth after so many months of defending my position and insisting that I could handle everything independently. Margaret was waiting in our kitchen when I arrived home, her face reflecting the hope and anxiety that had been her constant companions throughout the legal process. She had prepared my favorite dinner, probably anticipating that I would need comfort food regardless of whether the news was good or bad, and her thoughtfulness reminded me of all the ways she had supported me through the darkest period of our marriage without complaint or criticism. I sat down at our kitchen table, the same table where we had shared thousands of family meals and important conversations over the years, and explained the Workers' Compensation Board's decision and what it meant for our financial future. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression shifting from disappointment to resignation to quiet determination as she processed the information and began considering our next steps. "We need to call David," she said simply, her voice carrying no judgment or recrimination despite the fact that she had been suggesting this course of action for months while I stubbornly refused to consider it. Her ability to focus on solutions rather than blame reminded me why I had fallen in love with her 40 years earlier and why our marriage had survived challenges that had destroyed many other police families. I nodded, knowing she was right but still struggling with the emotional difficulty of admitting to my son that I had been wrong about handling our financial crisis independently. The prospect of hearing, "I told you so," or facing his justified anger about the time we had wasted and the stress we had endured unnecessarily made the phone call feel more daunting than any dangerous situation I had faced during my police career. Margaret handed me my phone and sat beside me at the table, her presence providing the moral support I needed to dial David's number and begin the conversation that should have happened 3 years earlier. My hands shook slightly as I scrolled through my contacts, finding his name and staring at it for several moments before finally pressing the call button and listening to the ringtone that seemed to last forever. "Hi, Dad," David answered, his voice cautious but not unfriendly, suggesting that he was surprised to hear from me during a weekday afternoon when we normally only spoke during scheduled family events or emergencies. I could hear office sounds in the background, indicating that he was at work, and I briefly wondered if I should have waited until evening to make this call. But Margaret's encouraging nod convinced me to proceed. "David, I have some news about the workers' compensation case," I began, my voice steadier than I had expected despite the emotional turmoil I was feeling. "The board denied our claim today, which means we won't be receiving the settlement we've been counting on for the past 3 years. I wanted to let you know before you heard it from your mother or someone else in the family." There was silence on the other end of the line for several seconds, and I could imagine David processing this information and its implications for our family's financial situation. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle rather than accusatory, showing a maturity and compassion that made me proud of the man he had become despite our recent difficulties. "I'm sorry to hear that, Dad," he said quietly. "I know how much you were hoping for a different outcome, and I can only imagine how disappointed and frustrated you must be feeling right now. This has been such a long and difficult process for you and Mom, and I hate that it ended this way after everything you've been through." His response caught me off guard because I had been prepared for anger, recrimination, or at least a subtle reminder that he had offered help that I had refused, but instead he was offering sympathy and understanding that I probably didn't deserve after the way I had treated his previous attempts to support our family. His grace in this moment made what I needed to say next both easier and more difficult. "David, I need to tell you something that I should have said months ago," I continued, my voice beginning to crack with emotion as I prepared to swallow my pride and admit the mistakes I had made. "You were right about accepting help from family, and I was wrong to refuse your offers and to let my pride create unnecessary hardship for everyone. I'm sorry for being stubborn and for making this situation more difficult than it needed to be." The words hung in the air for a moment, and I could hear David's sharp intake of breath as he processed what might have been the first genuine apology I had offered him since our relationship had become strained over money and family responsibilities. Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand, providing silent encouragement as I continued with the most difficult part of the conversation. "If your offers of help are still available, we would be grateful to accept them," I said, forcing myself to get the words out despite every instinct that told me to maintain my independence and handle our problems without involving our children in our financial struggles. "We're behind on the mortgage, and with only my disability payments as income, we won't be able to catch up without assistance from someone who cares about keeping this family together." David's response came quickly and without hesitation, suggesting that he had been waiting for this conversation and had already considered what he would say when the opportunity arose. "Of course, Dad," he said, his voice warm with relief and affection. "I never stopped wanting to help, and I'm just glad you're finally willing to let me do something useful instead of watching from the sidelines while you and Mom struggle unnecessarily." We talked for another 20 minutes, with David asking practical questions about our mortgage situation, monthly expenses, and immediate needs, while assuring me that helping his parents wasn't a burden or sacrifice, but rather an opportunity to give back to the people who had supported him throughout his education and early career. His enthusiasm about being able to contribute to our family's well-being reminded me that accepting help could be a gift to the giver as well as the receiver. By the time we hung up, David had committed to paying our mortgage for 6 months while we developed a longer-term financial plan, and he had insisted on covering the medical expenses that our insurance hadn't paid during my recovery process. More importantly, he had expressed gratitude that I had finally trusted him enough to be honest about our situation and to accept his help without conditions or timeline restrictions. That evening, Margaret and I sat in our living room discussing the day's events and the phone call that had restored our relationship with our son while providing hope for our financial future. She reminded me that strength sometimes requires accepting help from others, and that the independence I had been so determined to maintain was actually a form of isolation that had hurt everyone I was trying to protect. The next morning, David arrived at our house before work with coffee and donuts from our favorite bakery, ready to sit down with our financial documents and create a realistic plan for getting our household back on solid ground. His professional expertise in financial planning proved invaluable as he helped us organize our debts, prioritize our expenses, and establish a budget that would work with my disability income once our immediate crisis was resolved. Working together on our financial recovery became an opportunity for David and me to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and honest communication, rather than the pride and stubbornness that had created so much unnecessary tension. He helped me understand that accepting help didn't diminish my worth as a father or provider, but rather demonstrated trust in the values and work ethic I had instilled in him throughout his childhood and young adulthood. Over the following months, our family dinners returned to their previous warmth and closeness, with conversation flowing naturally without the undercurrent of financial stress and unresolved conflict that had made gatherings uncomfortable for so long. Margaret seemed lighter and happier, relieved to no longer carry the burden of mediating between her husband and son while worrying about our mortgage and household expenses. 6 months after that difficult phone call, our financial situation had stabilized to the point where I was able to resume making mortgage payments from my disability income, with David's help having provided the breathing room we needed to reorganize our debts and adjust to our new economic reality. More importantly, our family relationships had not only recovered but had grown stronger through the process of working together to solve problems rather than allowing pride to create artificial barriers. David and I began meeting for coffee once a week, conversations that ranged from current events and family updates to deeper discussions about life lessons, career challenges, and the importance of asking for help when facing situations that are too big to handle alone. These weekly meetings became one of the highlights of my retirement, providing me with insights into his professional world while giving him perspectives from my decades of law enforcement experience. A year after the workers' compensation denial, I received an unexpected phone call from a private law firm specializing in police injury cases, informing me that they had reviewed my case and believed they could successfully appeal the decision based on new precedents that had been established in similar situations. They offered to take the case on contingency, meaning I wouldn't owe legal fees unless they won the appeal, removing the financial risk that had prevented me from pursuing further legal action. The new legal team's approach was more aggressive and thorough than my previous representation, focusing on the heroic nature of my actions rather than allowing the insurance company to characterize my response as excessive force. They gathered witness statements from civilians who had been at the scene, expert testimony from law enforcement professionals about proper response procedures, and medical documentation that clearly established the connection between my work-related injury and my ongoing disabilities. 18 months later, we received news that the appeal had been successful and that I would receive both a lump sum settlement covering the 3 years of denied benefits and ongoing workers' compensation payments that would supplement my disability income for the rest of my life. The financial security provided by this outcome allowed Margaret and me to plan for a comfortable retirement while also establishing a college fund for our future grandchildren. The settlement also provided me with an opportunity to repay David for his help during our family's financial crisis. But when I offered to return the money he had contributed to our mortgage and medical expenses, he refused to accept repayment. Instead, he suggested that we use the settlement money to travel together as a family, creating positive memories that would last much longer than any financial transaction. David's response to my offer of repayment taught me a final lesson about family relationships and the true meaning of support during difficult times. He explained that helping his parents hadn't been a loan or investment expecting returns, but rather an expression of love and gratitude that didn't require reciprocal payment. His generosity reminded me that the strongest families are built on mutual support rather than strict accounting of who owes what to whom. Today, 5 years after that devastating phone call informing me that my workers' compensation claim had been denied, I can look back on the experience as a turning point that ultimately strengthened my family relationships and taught me valuable lessons about pride, independence, and the importance of accepting help when facing challenges that are too big to handle alone. The text message I sent to David that day, "I'm sorry," represented the beginning of a conversation that healed our relationship and restored our family's closeness after months of unnecessary tension and misunderstanding. Those 2 simple words, which had been so difficult to type because of my stubborn pride, became the foundation for rebuilding trust and communication that had been damaged by my refusal to accept reasonable offers of assistance from someone who loved me. My story serves as a reminder that strength and independence don't require handling every challenge alone, and that accepting help from family members can be a gift to both the receiver and the giver. The pride that I thought was protecting my dignity as a provider actually created barriers that prevented my son from showing his love and gratitude in practical ways, and my eventual willingness to accept help allowed our relationship to grow stronger than it had ever been before. The workers' compensation battle that seemed like such a devastating defeat became the catalyst for positive changes in our family dynamics and financial planning that benefited everyone involved. Sometimes what appears to be failure or setback actually opens doors to growth and healing that wouldn't have been possible if everything had proceeded according to our original plans and expectations. If this story has touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment to comment below and let us know where you are watching from, as well as your thoughts on family dynamics like this. Every perspective matters, because stories like these remind us that while families may face struggles, challenges, and even heartbreak, there is always an opportunity for healing, connection, and growth. By sharing your own reflections, you not only add to the conversation but also create a ripple effect of encouragement for others who may be experiencing something similar. When you engage, whether it's through commenting, liking, or subscribing, you are helping us build a space where families can feel less alone and more supported. Many people silently carry burdens within their homes, and often just hearing that someone else understands can provide an enormous sense of relief and hope. This channel is more than a platform for stories. It's a community where resilience, compassion, and solidarity take center stage. Your support allows us to continue creating and sharing content that uplifts, inspires, and shines a light on the very real challenges that families go through. We believe that even in the most difficult circumstances, there are lessons to be learned and strength to be found. And together, by engaging with these stories, we can remind one another that no family has to navigate their journey in isolation. So please, if this message resonates with you, don't hesitate to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you're not just supporting us. You're standing with countless families around the world who find courage and comfort in knowing that they are part of a wider circle of understanding and care. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for helping us continue to share these powerful stories of resilience and hope.